Hello. I see some folks are still joining, but let's get underway. My name is Mariette DiCristina, and I'm the Dean of the College of Communication. I'm also a COM alum and the parent of a recent BU grad. Humans wouldn't be humans without communication. We share our stories, and that helps foster understanding. The communication industry has always been a fast-changing one, whether we're adapting to the endless array of new technologies or to the latest cultural shifts. The coronavirus pandemic only seems to have accelerated change, and also at the same time reminding us all about the importance of reliable, trustworthy communication for everyone. What's ahead for communication in the next 5 years? Well, we're in luck today because the experts on our panel will rev up their crystal balls for a conversation about the future of the communications industry. This session is being recorded and will be available on the COM website after this event. Now I'm excited to introduce our speakers. First, please join me in welcoming Sabrina Horn, graduate of COM in '85 and a member of BU Alumni Council. She is CEO of Horn Strategy, LLC, a bespoke consulting firm focused on helping entrepreneurs, founders, and CEOs navigate the early stages of their startup companies. Previously, Sabrina was CEO and president of Horn Group, iconic US technology communications company she founded in Silicon Valley at age 29 and ran for over 2 decades. She's currently working on a book called Make It, Don't Fake It, Real Leadership for Business Success, which will be out next spring through Barrett Kohler. Welcome to you, Sabrina.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
It's awesome to have you. Now I'd like to say hello to David Jacobson, graduated CGS in '89 and COM in '91. He is Vice President of Communications, Public Finance Group at Moody's Investors Service. He manages all communication for the company's Public Finance Group, which provides ratings and research on US states, local governments, and higher education, nonprofit hospitals, infrastructure, and utilities and public power. He's also expanded Moody's outreach from trade publications to the mainstream media, helped develop social media strategy, and spearheads a new communication strategy on cybersecurity risks for all of Moody's rated issuers. Welcome to you, David.
Thank you.
Our next speaker, and I'm welcoming her from the road, is Hallie Johnson, ComGrad in '98. Hallie is Chief Client Officer at US at Initiative, where she leads and manages all client relationships across Initiative's 3 US offices in New York, Chicago, and LA, and is accountable for all client revenue and P&L. For her efforts at Initiative, Hallie was named the 2019 Adweek 5020, which honored stellar media, marketing, and tech execs who helped make 2019 a standout year for their brands. Prior to Initiative, Hallie was Senior Vice President of Client Services and Head of Branded Content at Refinery 29, the leading millennial women's digital publisher. Welcome to you, Hallie, and thanks for joining.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be with you.
Last, I'm super happy to introduce our panel's moderator, Lou Aversano, a Questrom grad in '88. He's Chief Client Officer worldwide at Ogilvy. Lou leads an integrated team who seek to bring Ogilvy's next chapter strategy to life. And he also takes great pride in building and nurturing talent. He's committed to helping to create Ogilvy's future workforce by bringing together talent with diversity of skill, gender, and of expertise. Lou spent over 20 years at Ogilvy, and we're really lucky to have him today. Over to you, Lou, to moderate, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Dean Christina, and thanks to everyone for being here. We've got about 80 some odd people in the virtual world, and I think one of the things about doing this, while it would be nice to be in person together, we can get a broader reach and a broader access to all of you to reach out to you. So welcome on behalf of all of us. We've got a good session planned. We'll spend about the first 20 minutes just having a Q&A with the panelists, talking about our thoughts on the future of, although I will say personally, when I agreed to do this, it was prior to the pandemic, not knowing that I would be having to be sitting here moderating a panel on the future of anything during a pandemic. I'm not so sure I would have said yes, but nonetheless, really, really happy to be here. We'll then open it up to audience Q&A for all of you to engage, and that's usually the best part of the session. Just for a bit of logistics, if you look below, There's a Q&A box on the bottom bar. We ask that you just start logging your questions in as you think of them, and we'll handle them off when we get to the Q&A session. So when a question strikes, just type it in and we'll take a look at it. The other thing, just from a logistics standpoint, we've got a poll. We want to hear what you think about the future as well, given your perspective. So there's 3 questions that we put up in the poll. If you want to take time while we're going through the panel Q&A to think about your answers, they're multiple choice. And Dean Christina has promised us she will not grade our answers, so it should be pretty easy for all of you. And we'll just see what we all think about the future to guide some of our Q&A after. So thank you all for being here. I think when you step back and think about the future, part of what we're going to talk about today is, obviously what we thought about the future was one point in time before the pandemic. But as we go through the pandemic and we're dealing with the disease, disruption, disasters, and unfortunately in some cases death, it has changed our view on change and how we lead our way through this, and what types of shifts are happening both in terms of consumer beliefs and attitudes, technology acceleration, and just how the communication industry will come out of this. And I think at the end of the day, as we step back as leaders, part of our job is to create certainty even when there is some of the greatest amounts of uncertainty. So I'm very excited to be joined by my fellow panelists, who we will go back and forth, hopefully with good measure, and give all of you an informed perspective. So with that, I'm going to kick it off. And I've got my first question to Sabrina. So Sabrina, prior to the pandemic, I think we would all agree that our industry was going through rapid change and disruption. The headlines were filled with the end of this, next generation that. Technology fragmentation being some of the biggest changes and drivers. How do you think living through the pandemic for the past 6 months, looking at that and some of the social unrest, do you think the course of change has been altered? And if so, why?
Well, I mean, does the sun shine? Yes. I mean, yes, it has altered the course, and it has only, I think, created more opportunities for technologies in our field, and also to deal with fragmentation. So I think, you know, it's kind of interesting, like in one sense, we are coming together as a human race to deal with the pandemic, but we've become so divided as people because of all the unrest. So it's kind of like this interesting thing that's happening at the same time. And so while that's happening, there's all kinds of new technologies that have accelerated their use, right? Whether we're working to sign documents with DocuSign, or making payments with Venmo and Zelle, or you know, needing more cybersecurity technologies to protect those transactions. And of course, like Zoom, which is what we're all using right now to actually communicate with each other. So, I mean, that's only going to continue. And now that we've gotten comfortable with it, you know, there's only going to be more use of it. In terms of like artificial intelligence as well, and being in the technology sphere, I would, you know, offer that there's a tremendous interest in predicting behavior, right? Because it gives us some assurity of something maybe we can hang our hats on. And that comes into play in analytics, even determining stock price based on comments made in social media, you know, posts and tweets. So, you know, that and the fragmentation that is occurring, it's an increased use of tools. It's an increased use of dealing with different audiences in different ways and targeting messages to them. But then at some point, artfully and sort of methodically bringing people back together again. And so, you know, I'm writing this book, and I think there's going to be a whole anti-fake movement. It's all going to be about coming back to what we as PR people do the best, which is we find the truth, we communicate the truth, and we provide a path forward for other people. And that, you know, that's our credo in a way, right? We are the change agents, and we make change okay for people. So I think that it it's going to be difficult for us to stitch all of that together, but there's also tremendous opportunity in that, in the use of the tools and communicating in new ways and providing hope for a better future for the constituents that we all deal with.
Great, thank you, Sabrina. And David, you come from a completely, not completely, but somewhat different sector. Perspective. Do you want to add anything to Sabrina's perspective?
Yeah, and I've kind of, Dean DiChristina talked about my background, but I've worked in an agency. I have managed an outside agency, and I've spent most of my time working on the client side, which is in-house for public relations. So that's my background. I want to start though with kind of what I hope is a reassuring thought that one day we're all going to be back in the office. We will all be back on campus. I don't know about you, and maybe I'm going to be in the minority here on this panel, but I've had it working at home. I can't take it anymore. I'm ready to go back like now. The main thing I have learned is that there is nothing that will beat in-person collaboration. A 100% remote team, in my opinion, just is not as effective and is not as efficient as when you are in the office or the agency or on campus, being able to bounce ideas off each other, consulting with each other, getting second opinions. And I think it's similar to being on campus. I remember hearing, when we talk about sort of the price of college that, oh, well, maybe we can just, save money and just go to an all online university. Well, we've done an all online university. And I think we see there is nothing that can really replicate what happens to have that on-campus experience, not just at work, but outside of work as well, outside of the classroom. And I think it's the same thing wherever we're working, that, all these new tools that Sabrina talked about are absolutely, they're great. I'm grateful that technology, at least for us, has been working for the most part. I've been able to work online. That has been helpful, but I just don't think it beats working in person. I would also say that you also talked about things, Lou, like fragmentation, and the audience is getting fragmented. The media, especially, just because I do spend a lot of time working with journalists, is getting fragmented as well. I think, if anything, using technology more will accelerate that. We're all aware of how dire the state of journalism is. A lot of journalists that I work with, which is mainly in the financial services sector, have left, but it's interesting. They have actually gone in-house, not to an in-house like in public relations agency, which is where they used to go, but they're actually now working for the companies they used to cover doing branded content. So this is something that I think is very interesting. And as part of the technology that Sabrina was talking about, we, Moody's, and I'm sure many of the companies that everybody works with as well, we don't have to rely on a shrinking media to get our message out like we used to. Now we can do our own podcasts. We can do our own social media stuff. We're even doing our own videos. That's kind of a work in progress. But the fact that we're able to get that and use technology to get our message out much easier, and since it's kind of an all voluntary people who want to follow us, we're able to communicate that much easier than we used to, than if we, the old days, you just blast a release out and hopefully the media would get the message right. So it's kind of a double-edged sword.
Interesting. And I'm going to shift it up a little bit from our regularly scheduled programming that we plan, just to keep this thing moving. But, I think one of the things David talked about that is one of the, challenges in our industry is where content is created, agency, consultant, client. Hallie, you work with clients, as I do, all day long, all week long. What's your view on the in-house versus agency model, and how much change do you think that's going to bring forward for our industry?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question, and Lou, I'm sure your business is not immune to it either. But I think, there's always been different forms of clients having in-house services, right? And, I think first, the advertising type of creative content, social media, bringing a lot of, college graduates, young people who are very well versed in social media and what is resonating with brands and consumers. But now what we're also seeing is an influx of different media services coming in-house. So different types of media, paid media channels coming in-house. So whether it's e-commerce and, brands who want to sell direct to consumer, or different programmatic media buying, digital buying, more automated services and types of media. Those annoying ads that you see following you around all over the internet every time you click on a site. But what we're also seeing now from some of our clients is a lot of times brands are having more challenges doing that in-house because they might not be able to hire the right talent, or they're not seeing the rapidness. So we're also seeing some services boomerang back to our agency because they do want that skill and service and that long time expertise that, agencies have been doing tried and true strategies for their clients. So I'd say it's a mix of both, but certain clients, especially e-commerce for brands that are selling direct to consumers, and even more so now during the pandemic, where everyone is buying everything online, brands are seeing a lot of success having their own in-house teams to create the strategies.
Great, thanks. And Hallie, in terms of just how our industry is evaluated by clients, do you think, how do you think that criteria is being rewritten or changing over this time frame? I mean, there's been so much discussion about zooming in to people's homes. So we're getting to see the pictures behind Sabrina, David's workspace, where his family has sequestered him because they don't want him there as much as he wants to be there.
Sure.
But it's true, right? So, how are you finding that change in terms of forming relationships with clients going?
I actually feel, I feel like clients are really extremely appreciative of what we're able to do for them during such a unprecedented time to their business. A lot of tried and true tactics from a marketing perspective that a lot of brands relied on, they can't do anymore. And so we're helping them weather the storm. We're helping them pivot on a dime to think about new ways to reach consumers, like you said, since so many more people are at home or streaming, video or content online, or really, escaping on social media. So what we're actually seeing, we use a third-party consulting firm to measure our relationship with our clients, and we're seeing some of the highest satisfaction levels from clients now because they really need our help, and they're really appreciative that we're going just above and beyond, what they typically need sometimes.
Great, thank you. So, as much as the content changes and the models and channels in which we build it and deliver it changes, I think our leadership changes. And Sabrina, in leading a company, what has been the biggest change in leadership you've seen, and how do you think that will alter the course of our future?
Yeah, so I mean, that's the key question, right? I think it's coming back to what the core values are of a company and what it stands for. And I think, so many brands are in crisis right now, and we think crisis communications is not just when a terrible event happens like a pandemic, but everybody's in crisis with how they move forward to one degree or another. And it's really, I think, a time for quick introspection and reflection about what we want to stand for as leaders, how we want to move forward, right? And you have to think about where you want to be, maybe ideally, and then work your way back to the present. And then from there, it's crisis communications takes on a whole new kind of meaning. I also think that leadership would be well advised to take on more of a love-based marketing approach. And no pun intended, like I affectionately refer to love-based marketing as the opposite of fear-based marketing, because that's what people need right now. And they need to be understood, they need empathy, they need care. And, leadership has to really think about that and still remain authentic to, what they want to do with their businesses, their products, and their services. And then kind of tweak their brands and where they're going from that.
Interesting. And David, a question to you about the integrity of media and just thinking about what's going on right now with the social platforms such as Facebook and others. What's your point of view on the future and the actions taking now and where things are going? How do you see that shaping change?
I think one thing I'm seeing, I deal, as you heard, I kind of wear a few hats here and I work in a few sectors. So it's a combination of large daily papers like, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and then a whole bunch of regional outlets and then a whole bunch of trade outlets. One good news thing I'm seeing is that when some of these regional outlets, and some of the large dailies as well, unfortunately, when some of these very veteran, experienced journalists get downsized, they're starting up new nonprofit news sources. And I have found that these really take off. I don't know if it's because of the nonprofits, but they exist in a way very similar to the State House News Service in Massachusetts. And if you're not familiar with that, all the Massachusetts dailies used to have somebody in the State House who reported out. Unfortunately, very few do anymore. Apart from the Globe and the Herald, maybe the Worcester Telegram, I don't know who does anymore. But there's the State House News Service, and what they do is that they write stories about what's happening at the State House, and then that news is syndicated out to everyone in the state. So they'll write one story, but you might see that down in Quincy, down in Cape Cod, out in the Berkshires, all those areas. So I'm seeing these sort of pop up in lots of different states right now. And the ones that are really taking off are ones that go beyond the politics, but also focus on regional arts, regional businesses that are very, very good. They're very well written. And I think, again, because they're able to secure funding through sources other than advertising, they're growing very quickly. I'll give a shout out to one down in Texas called the Texas Tribune. This is based out of Austin, although they have some folks who work for them elsewhere. But I'm telling you, you get some coverage in this, and everyone in the state will know about it within 24 hours. So I find that to be encouraging. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting perspective. Thank you. So, last question for the panelists, and then we're going to shift it over to audience Q&A. So 2 things to the audience. Keep logging in those questions in the Q&A field. I see about 5 or 6 in there already. Hopefully we'll get some more. And Dan from Alumni Relations is going to close out the poll in 2 minutes. So if you want to get your votes in, now's the time to vote and put your opinion in the poll. So last question to all of you before we go over to audience Q&A, as I said. Our industry is filled with people who have for centuries predicted change. Change is coming, change is dangerous, change is good, change is bad. But, video never did kill the radio show. So what is the one thing that you all think will never change about our industry that we should always keep top of mind? And I'll kick it off with Sabrina.
Well, I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head. Like the one thing that will never change is dealing with change. Um, and
Sabrina
finding.
for the win on the question.
I mean, right? Like, but the key is finding innovative and new ways to deal with change. That's the key, because we cannot do what we did yesterday, because yesterday is gone. And so, we always have to be on our feet and find different ways of doing our jobs to deal with change.
Great. And David, next to you, and then I'm going to end on Haley. We'll give Haley last word from the car.
Well, there's kind of, when you're talking about value that communications brings, that's brought about in two ways, with strategies and with tactics. Tactics will always change because these new tools come up, new audiences change. If you're in an agency, you're going to get new accounts and so on. But the value and the overall goal, I think, will always stay the same. And from my perspective, there's basically two goals of any communications program, no matter where you work. Number one is drive sales. Okay, that's, at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. I always say to the sales department, and they should be your best friends, by the way, we can bring them to the door. It's your job to bring them into the house, but we help bring them to the door. So that's number one. The second thing, for lack of a better word, is just branding the company or the cause or whatever it is that you work for. What's the reputation that you want to have? If you say, my company is X, we provide the X. Now the X should change, of course, as things change, but as times change, as external circumstances that you don't have control over change. But that branding, that will always be communications bailiwick.
Great. And then Haley?
Well, I was hoping someone wouldn't have already said my answer, but for me, it's actually the value, I believe, of working in communications and marketing is really people. There's so much technology happening in our industry and in our world, frankly. There's so much use of automation and AI and, however, for me, I really believe in collaborating with other people, having that human connection, being able to empathize with the people who are using your brand is really the value of where I see that things are hopefully will not change.
Great, thanks. So thank you guys. As I said, we're now going to shift gears and go into the audience Q&A. But before we do that, I just wanted to share the results of our very robust poll. So the first question, just for all of you that we threw out to the group, was how optimistic are you about the future of our industry? Unfortunately, roughly 70, doing my math in my head, 75% are either very or somewhat optimistic. It's kind of a tie for first and second place. About 20 were uncertain. 4% of you, 4 people, somewhat pessimistic, and no one is very pessimistic. But I do think it's interesting about the optimism being measured with the uncertainty about just what the outlook looks like. Second question, of the forces below, which one do you believe will bring about the greatest change for your industry? And again, technology digital wins the day with about 42% of the vote. Second place, media fragmentation or distrust, 32%, with either shifting consumer beliefs and data and privacy tied for third place, with increased competition coming in last. So a lot of different forces for all of us to deal with, and to Sabrina's point, to stay ahead of, to ensure we innovate. And then the last, the infamous acceleration question that we've all been talking about. On one hand, the virus has hit us with so much disruption. In other places, people are looking at the virus as a vaccine of sorts, sort of a wake-up call to humanity and business to make sure that it prepares itself so that we are better prepared for a catastrophe. And with that comes acceleration of change, where I think clients are just as much as we've been sitting home cleaning our closets out, are cleaning out their marketing and communications closets. And by and large, 64% of you think that change will just continue to accelerate, and the pace in which we deal with it will do so. So thank you guys, an interesting point of view from all of you. And now we're gonna go into the best part of the day, your questions. I'm just moving my little screens around so I can get the Q&A box up. And keep putting them in there. So I'm just gonna take a look at all of them, and I'm gonna MC the Q&A and fastball them to each of our panelists. So the first question from one of will we ever trust social media again to the extent that it can direct behavior, for instance, getting vaccinated? So David, over to you on that one.
Okay. Will we ever trust social media?
You get to decide the future of social media.
How about that? Well, it's here. It's unfortunately the genie's out of the bottle here. I don't think you can really put it back. What I would say is I would say you try to, as possible, it kind of gets back into the branding and reputation I think I spoke of. I don't trust anything that comes in a meme, okay? I don't trust really much of anything that's sort of hearsay or secondhand unless I get it myself. We have, at Moody's, look, we're in financial services, so we're very heavily regulated. We're not in every social media channel, but we do have Twitter and LinkedIn, mainly because, number one, we talked about knowing your audience. Our audience is more so on those two, and they look to those two as a place for information, more so than like Facebook or Instagram or anywhere else like that. Now, if I worked for like an arts company or a media company, I would be all over Instagram. So that'd be number one, is looking at which source is the most reliable. Number two, I know on Twitter they have those little blue check marks that's like an authenticated source. So not everybody has them. Frankly, to be honest, I'm not sure if Moody's has them, but anytime you get something from an official company outlet, and the company has, again, a good reputation, which is the result of communications, that should be news that it's trustworthy, I would say. And it's a very difficult question. It's not trusting social media, because social media is just sort of another quiver in your I'm not saying this right, but
another arrow.
Thank you. It's another arrow in your quiver that you can use correctly. So it's not just the medium of the message, it's where you're getting this information. If you see something that looks dubious, try to see if it's available somewhere else. If it sounds a little wacky, just see if see what a trusted source that you rely on has to say about that.
Thank you, David. Sabrina, for you, how do you think folks are responding to media fatigue? There's been so much written about we're now consuming more media than ever before, accelerating into that given our time home in the pandemic. So what are you seeing different in the virtual world that you think we'll take with us as we go forward in terms of media consumption and fatigue?
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm sure all of us have kind of felt that, right? I mean, it's like, there are so many of my friends who just take a break from Facebook or just don't want to watch the 6 o'clock news. And, so where does it go from here? Like, I think we're all on information overload of one form or another, whether it's politics or racial issues or the environment, or like, it's not just one issue, it's like a lot of them. And so I think, where do we go from here? I think individuals and companies need to be very clear in their messaging so that they can somehow cut through the noise, right, and be heard. I mean, I work with so many entrepreneurs and little startups, and they're like, should we even bother? because will our message even be heard? And so, of course, there are rules you should follow, not to be ambulance chasing and so forth. But, good news and good information that is timed well and has some newsworthiness because it solves a problem that people have, still has a place. And so it just means being very brief and to the point, and choosing the channel that you want to use very selectively. But then on the receiving end of it, speaking as individuals, right, it's also like we just have to filter some of it out because you just can't move forward every day being bombarded with all of this, like, essentially really bad news. I don't know if that answers the question, but I think picking the right strategy and the right message at the right time is always true, but no more true than now.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to now mash up a bunch of different audience questions. There's a lot of questions in here about career advice, and they travel from what did each of us learn at BU that helped us with our careers to how would you help someone starting out today? So, as much of the economy has shifted and the job market has changed, what advice would you give folks who are either starting out their careers now or trying to shift their careers, looking for new opportunities? And Hallie, I'll kick it off with you.
Yeah, so I guess two things. For me, what I learned at Boston University was that actually I started my majoring in photojournalism. And what I quickly learned when I was doing that, which I loved, and I was working at the paper at BU, was I really actually liked learning about the stories that I was photographing and realizing that actually I took an intro to advertising class and I realized you could tell stories to more people even through different forms of marketing and advertising. So for me, that was, I think, what I learned is being curious about different forms of communication and thinking about how to just generate and communicate a story or your story through different platforms. But I would say my advice now to people who are looking to, get their career started, I would say don't feel like you need to necessarily look for jobs that are exactly matching to what you learned in school. I think for us, we're looking for diverse candidates that are coming into our company and into our agency. We're not necessarily looking for, I interned 2 years at an advertising agency. We want diverse thinkers, diverse voices. And so don't feel like you necessarily have to look for a job that is only what you studied or what you interned at. I think feeling like you can challenge yourself maybe to think about other areas or other places to look for jobs that also match your personal values as well. So.
Great. And David, what advice would you give our audience about the job market, whether just entering or transitioning?
I have, I think, 3 pieces of advice. My first advice is what I always say to anyone who is looking to make any sort of career shift or needs a new job, which is network furiously. The ironic thing about being between jobs is now you normally have the time to do just that. However, given the pandemic, this is what makes it a little more challenging. But I would say, use a professional network like LinkedIn. If you're still in school, use your professors. They've kept in touch with some of us. Actually, they've kept in touch with all of us. And then when you when you try to do this, don't say, I'm looking for a job necessarily, but just ask if you want to meet and talk shop, who you want to have just an informational meeting. And then the most important thing, I think, is when you finally do get to meet someone, hopefully in person, but if necessary over the phone or over Zoom, try to come away with 3 contacts, okay? Ask that person, hey, do you know anyone else, 3 people who you would recommend that I can talk to? And then you will call those 3 people. Let's say one of them gets back to you. Then you meet with that person, have the same thing. Hey, do you have 3 people I can meet with? They will give you 3 people. Let's say 2 of those 3 people get back to you. And then you see how this works. So that's how you build a network. And gosh, look, you've got 4 people here who I'm sure will be more than willing to help you out, at least talk to you about what's going on. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, especially if you want to go into communications, be a good writer. I oversee our internship program, and I can tell you the number one thing that drives me up the wall is seeing college kids that cannot write, okay? I don't care how highly recommended you are. If I look at your resume or your cover letter and I see a typo or a grammatical error, it goes in the trash. So make sure when you're doing any sort of writing, you proofread it, it's as good as it possibly can be. The last thing I would say is, now I know that sometimes you're less choosy about this depending on your situation, but if there is a certain sector that you want to go into, such as financial services or entertainment or biotech or anything like that, think about your location, because while there are some jobs you can do from anywhere, you're much better off looking for work in certain cities. For example, if you want to stay in Boston and you want to work in the technology sector or the biotech sector or maybe the higher ed sector, that's great. That's the best place to be. But if you want to work in something else like financial services, you may want to think about a relocation change. New York, for example, if you want to do some consumer related stuff or financial stuff, New York is a better place than Boston. And if you want to do entertainment, you should probably be in Los Angeles or Nashville or maybe Vegas. So just think about where you want to look. And if you want a job that badly, you may need to consider some sort of relocation. And it's a lot easier to do that when you're first starting your career.
Thank you. And Sabrina, just from your perspective, in addition to all the great advice that Hallie and David have given, just talk a little bit about not only how to get in, but what types of areas do you think are becoming more critical in terms of skills and expertise?
Right. So, I mean, I agree with all of my panelists' comments. If you're a senior person, okay, let me back up. Right now, every company is rebuilding in some way, shape, or form. And so it will be important to multitask. So if you're a more senior person and you're, very strategic, you probably also need to roll up your sleeves. And if you're an entry-level person, you want to think broadly, not just as a specialist. And so however it is you position yourself or your resume or how you talk about yourself in the interview should kind of play to that. And in terms of industries, I mean, of course, we've had this whole conversation about technology, right? Like tech is where it's at, as is healthcare, and those are the 2 primary industries. Like if you're going to buy stock, those would be the 2 companies, the 2 industries to buy stock in. But particularly within technology, analytics is certainly going to be a big area both for consumers and also for enterprises, for B2B companies. Artificial intelligence is a technology that will be in everything. So if you work for a tech company that makes something that's AI based, that's right on. But if you can find those companies that are either sensitive in their brand appeal to the current state of affairs and are being very empathetic in how they communicate and are shifting their brand, or companies in the fields I mentioned in those industries, that would be something to try and focus on.
Great, thanks. And then interesting questions about just the future of employment and just how the job market will shift, with technology coming on, between automation and skills. Hallie, what's your view on that?
Yeah, so at our company, we are definitely automating a lot of manual-based tasks that actually take a lot of time that, quite frankly, a lot of people who are coming into our industry in marketing and advertising don't really want to do. They want to be creative. They want to be strategic. They want to learn about brands. And so those are the services, or those are the areas that, one, we're trying to automate to help our clients and our teams be able to work smarter, right? I think also what we're focusing on a lot is similar what to Sabrina mentioned. We have over 90 data scientists and folks who are econometric modelers in our company who are really using data and marketing technology to really advance our client strategies within media. So I think, I don't think you can replace human thinking necessarily. Sabrina, you might argue differently, but I think you can. I think you can help your company work smarter. You can, accelerate business at a much faster pace to meet the demands of how consumers what their needs are, and how to accelerate your business growth even faster as a brand or as your own company as an agency.
Interesting. And David, what's your view on that?
I was hoping you were going to call on Sabrina for that.
There's only 4 of us.
Yeah, I would say, data is important. I don't have a team of data crunchers. I sometimes go through that myself, but one thing I can tell you is that in our business, both advertising and public relations especially, there has been over the last few years a big shift to measurement. In other words, how do you measure how successful things are? This is kind of a tough area. Because you can picture the client who's paying you however many thousands a month to get results, and they're like, well, how do I measure results? That kind of gets back to what I was saying before. Just number one, well, how many sales leads are you getting? That's how you tell how successful your campaigns are. But then in terms of fine-tuning how you want to communicate some of the messages that we have, what I do, there's been some talk about social media here. I would say every month I go through and I look at the analytics of all the various social media stuff that we've sent out. And I want to see what was resonant, what worked, what didn't work, and why did it work or not work? What are the words that are the hashtags or whatever that people keep coming back to? And then how do you measure growth? Well, with the Twitter feed, it's kind of easy. It's how many users we're getting, how many followers we're getting. What I do is I take those and I report back to the line of business I work with every month. And I say, hey, this is what's working, this is what isn't. So not only just saying that, the strategy part is, what do you recommend? What do these numbers mean? I think that's the key. I think crunching the numbers is the easy part. It's taking that data and explaining to the client or whoever it is that you're working with, well, this is what you have to do to make this message more resonant, because it will lead to the 2 things we talked about: better reputation, or at least continuing your good reputation, and hopefully driving sales.
Interesting. So last question that we'll take, and then we'll close it out. We've got about 9 minutes left before the webinar closes. And I want to make sure I leave some time at the end to summarize and thank everyone. One of the first questions we got, which I thought was one of the most interesting, so I saved it, was from someone who graduated from COM in 1967 and studied under a professor named Neil Postman. And he also attended courses at Fordham where Marshall McLuhan taught. And he coined the phrase global community. And is the pandemic giving us more of a global community, or because of social media and some of the politicization in the world today, are we becoming a tribal community? And what change will that bring as we go forward? So I will end on that rather philosophical question for all of us to ponder. And I will hand the first baton over to David.
You know, if you only think in terms of politics, and unfortunately I think there are a lot of people that only think in terms of politics, you're going to be tribal, okay? If you are a little bit more holistic and realistic, you will see that there is a global or American or town or whatever community that you have. How that impacts our job? Well, it depends what your job is and who you're trying to reach. Sometimes you want to reach a various tribe of whatever that is, a certain region or a certain age group or a certain people who think that way. If you're in, say, a public affairs or you're doing some sort of election stuff, then you have to think a little bit more broadly. I've done, or I've worked with, I should say, there was a public affairs group in Boston whose specialty was ballot questions. So they kind of had both, you know, there was a tribe, but it was a tribe of people inside Massachusetts. And their job was to reach everyone in that tribe through various methods of communication and try to, you know, get people to vote yes or no on whatever the ballot question was. And, you know, if it was something more attuned toward prescription drugs, you know, that was something that you would probably use more traditional techniques and you'd probably go after an older audience. And so I'd say the answer is it depends, you know, how you look at things and, you know, how optimistic or pessimistic you are.
And Hallie, global or tribal community? Where do you stand on this divide?
I think global. I mean, I think, yes, you could always say social media and technology, you know, it's bridging the gaps of, you know, bringing people together. But I think right now, I feel like, you know, people are communicating on a more human level. So I think bringing in humanity, like you also mentioned, Sabrina, is bringing along empathy. And so I think about even my experience, what's happening right now during the pandemic. I'm actually talking on the phone more often to my friends and colleagues, you know, around the world. And communicating with them and what's happening in their town, what's happening in their workplace. And so I feel like actually this could be a turning point of bringing people more together, turning more inwards to their community, but also, you know, also really connecting with brands globally that are really reaching people's values and that, you know, you want to spend time with on a emotional level, or an escapism level. So I would say global community, and I'm trying to be on the positive outlook right now because I think in the beginning it was easy to be doom and gloom, and there's still a lot of incredible hardships that people around the world are facing, and that's going to continue, but I'm trying to be hopeful.
Good. So Sabrina, in a minute.
Yeah.
The last word for Sabrina from the panelists.
Okay.
1 minute. Global or tribal?
Yeah, so like I'm an optimist as well. And I think it's actually both. Like we're never going to stop being global. It's forced us to think globally in a different way. And I think that the sort of tribal aspect of it has always been there, and it's there now. It's just shifted in terms of focus. To David's point, like if you're really into politics, that's your tribe, man. That's all you think about. But you know, I think it's going to continue to be a mixture of both. And and you know, it's going to sort of like meander in and out of that, right? You know, we're only just getting started here. So it'll be interesting to see how this all unfolds.
Great. So we're almost at the close of our time together. So I just want to thank all of the audience for, comprised of students, alumni, faculty, guests for their engagement. I want to make sure I take the time to thank Dan and Susan and Tracy and the whole alumni relations community for making sure this events like this come together. I think there's no better time for us to stay together as a congregation of folks who have such dedication, love, and commitment to such a wonderful institution such as BU. A big thank you to Dean Christina for welcoming us and making these events possible. I know the university has so much going on right now in dealing with one of the greatest challenges it faces and making sure that we keep learning going forward so that we continue to improve. And I just want to take a moment to thank someone on the call, I think it's still on the call, Toby Verkovitz, who is retiring, who leads the Ad Lab community. Ad Lab was what basically changed my life. So to Hallie's point and the points made by David and Sabrina, you know, I came to BU, I was in CGS, which was then called CBS. I failed out of that, story for another day, repiloted myself into Questrom, but because I was behind in credits, I found Ad Lab, and there I found my career, my love, and my passion that wouldn't have happened without BU. So a big round of applause to my friend Toby. And to all of you who are out there, I think there's, you know, times are changing with speed and acceleration, but talent always finds opportunity. And the more you keep your skills fresh and your mind open and your heart big, I think the job market, as it twists and turns, we're finding employment for people from places we never have before because part of the location barriers have been removed. You know, and one thing that may be good about Zoom, as much as we all do want to be back together, we can Zoom in or out from anywhere. So we're finding new ways to bring different skills together. So with that, a big thank you to everyone. Thank you to my panelists for fielding all of my rapid fire questions as I switched it up. You're really good sports, and I enjoyed my time here today. Be well, stay healthy, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.